Hi, this is Jamey from Stonemeyer Games, and I'm here today to talk about my favorite game mechanism in the Uwe Rosenberg classic, Ora e Labora. This game is new to me, and it is the best new to me game that I've played in a long time. It is fantastic, and I can't stop thinking about it. I've played it twice now in the last few days, and there's a lot to love. I'm going to try to keep this focused on maybe one or two mechanisms that I particularly love about it. The first thing is, I think it has the best economic system of any game that I've played, just period. And by that I mean that players are buying resources from a common pool, and they're not even buying them; they're just taking them. So you'll take a worker and you'll put it on your player mat on an action that says like get money or get wheat or get sheep. You don't pay anything; you just put the worker there, and then you look at a rondel on the middle of the board that shows the current quantities of all the resources. So if the sheep is on, if there's one sheep token for this rondel, if the sheep token is on the number 4, then you get 4 sheep, and you take that sheep token and you move it down to the bottom of the rondel where it says 0. And then at the end of every round, you move the rondel one space forward so that all the items have value. And there's no one space. So it goes 0, 2, 3, and then I think that's 4, then 5, 5, 6, 6. And that jump from 0 to 2 is really key because it means that at any time, you're not just, unless someone has just taken a resource, you're not just getting one resource. This rondel mechanism is just brilliant because it perfectly reflects, in my opinion, supply and demand. If a certain item is high in demand, then a lot of people are taking it and there aren't going to be many items of it for you to take. Whereas if no one's taking something, then you might try to hold out as long as possible to get 5 or 6 or 7 of that item in one turn to optimize your action. By using one worker, you might get a ton of one item. Also on the rondel is a wild token. So the wild token can be anything. So even if the person right before you has taken wood, maybe they took 5 wood that you're really hoping to get, the wild token might be on 4, and so you could use that to get wood instead. I can just tell that there's so many little design choices that went into this rondel that I just have a lot of respect for Rosenberg for what he did with it. And I love the shared economy of it. It just makes sense. It's intuitive. It's in the middle of the board or the middle of the table. It's really easy to see what you're going to get. And there's tension because you're hoping the person before you doesn't take the thing that you really want. And even if they do, there's probably something still that you can get that you'll enjoy. It's fantastic. It's also used as a timer for a bunch of other things in the game, like when new cards come out, when you can make certain buildings, and when the game is over. The second thing, I'll probably talk about 3 things. The second thing that I really love is that it is a game that has rounds, and in my designs I lean against having rounds, but it's a very organic process because at the end of the round, there's not like a big cleanup, there's not upkeep or any of that stuff. All you do is you turn the dial 1 notch, and then you keep on going. But the brilliant thing about the round in particular is that on any given round, if I'm the first player in that round, I take 2 turns. I take my turn, and then it goes clockwise around the table. Everybody else takes one more turn, and then I take one more turn, and then I pass the first player to the token to the next player. And so that may seem like a big advantage, right? Because you're getting 2 turns in one round, but everybody's going to get it, and the game is calculated so that you get an equal number of double turns of being the first player throughout the game. But it creates an organic way of figuring out who starts the next round. Because intuitively, I've just taken a turn, so naturally it's the next guy's turn to take. And it keeps things rotating. There's probably even more math around why that works so well that I'm not even saying here. But it's just, I don't think I've ever seen that in a game where on any given round you get to take 2 actions and then you pass the first player token. And that it somehow creates a very organic, natural feel to the flow of the game. I really, really like that. The last thing that I think is brilliant. So the first time I was playing the game, it's a little overwhelming because there are a lot of buildings that you can choose from, and they're staggered, which is good. Instead of having like all 40 or 50 buildings on the table from the first round, you get the same like 10 buildings in each, and it's not, I'm using the rounds wrong. So there are like certain eras of the game. I think like 4 or 5 eras, and in each of those eras, you'll pull out new buildings, like 10 new buildings, and you'll put them out. And there are specific 10 buildings. And on the back of your player mat is a guide that tells you what all of those buildings are, which is great because you can plan ahead. You can see, okay, in round 2, I'm finally going to have a way to convert stone into bracelets or jewelry. So I better have the resources to build that building that can do that. And then I better have the stone on hand so I can start converting it into victory points. You can really plan ahead that way. And so the first time I was playing, I was looking at this and I was thinking, okay, this is neat, but I mean, you could essentially play the same way every time. If you were ready for the same buildings, you could build the same buildings every game, and every game would be exactly the same. Why not add variation where instead of all 10 buildings coming out in a certain round, you have like 15 different buildings and you shuffle them and 10 of them come out, which in most games might work well, but in this particular game, it would really hurt the game because it really helps to plan ahead to those buildings. And if you've been working towards a certain building and a certain strategy, and that building simply didn't come out, it would have a huge impact on the game, a negative impact. And so it's one of those instances, I think we as designers often think that more variation and more variability is always a good thing, like universally a good thing. We hear this in game reviews all the time where they talk about variability. And I think maybe sometimes we overdo it. I don't think we need 100 different characters in every game. I don't think we need like all these different modules and combinations and things like that. I think sometimes you just need the good combinations to make, good options that can be the same every game, and that's okay if you give other elements of variation. So in Labora, the variable element, the key variable element, is the resource wheel. It's highly unlikely that any 2 games would ever be the same with that resource wheel. It's going to change every game, and so that adds in itself a ton of variation. So yeah, it's one of those things that I found from playing the 2 games that I played, that the first game I was like, well, why don't you have more buildings? The second game I was like, okay, I realized this, that it's so important to this game to have the same buildings every game, which is very odd. And I think it's important to keep in mind for myself as a designer that sometimes more variation isn't necessarily a good thing. I remember this came to mind when a friend of mine was talking about a deck building game when he was talking about that he was working on. And his main selling point for the deck building game was that there was like 3 billion different combinations of things that could happen in the game. And I found myself listening to that and thinking, that's cool, but why do you ever need 3 billion combinations of anything in a game? I'd rather have 100 really interesting combinations, or even just a dozen really interesting combinations, than a billion combinations that don't even differentiate that much from each other. It's just overkill after a certain point. And I think there, on the flip side, like in Labora, I think having the same exact thing actually makes the game more interesting. So I'm curious what you think about those 3 elements: the rondel, the way the turn order works, where you get to take 2 actions on your turn as the first player, and the whole idea of variation in games, and sometimes it being an asset for the game to have the same options every game, how that can actually be more interesting. I look forward to your comments. Thank you.